Hi, my name's Christina, and I am here today with Elizabeth Moll Stalcup, a founder and executive director of Healing Center International. And today we're going to find out about the latest book that she's written, The Glorious End of Ralph Oliver Mall, and why you're going to want to read it. So thanks, Betsy, for being here today and sharing about your book. I'm really excited about it. This was one of the hardest books you've ever written, as I understand it. Tell me
Mm.
about that. What made it so hard?
Well, I think it was hard because it was about a very difficult relationship with my father. And I had a real clear sense that God was calling me to write the book. He spoke to me very specifically about it right around the time my father died. But I was so caught up in grief and so overwhelmed at the time that I didn't really think I had the bandwidth. But what I did is I paid my then, how old would she have been, like 20-year-old daughter to just concatenate all the information into one huge document. And there was tons of emails, there were tons of things to kind of prompt my mind as to what had happened when. And then I spent a little bit of time going over that, adding more material. I'm a scientist by training, and so I like to be really accurate. And but then I just found it was so painful to think back on what had happened in my family, even though there was an incredibly glorious end. So it took me 14 years from start to finish, from the time I began until I finished. And I wrote many other books during that interval, but then I reached a point where God was saying to me, this one has to be the next one. And so at that point, I had to go back, start again, and stick to it.
So this was a real calling for you to write this book. It wasn't just a desire to share a story, but you were propelled forward by God himself to say, this is important. People need to hear it. But even knowing that, that didn't make it easy to get it from that initial paper writing document, all of that, to a finished book like what we hold in our hands today. Tell me
Mhm.
about that process.
Yeah, I think part of it for me was that the events that transpired over the two and a half years turned out to be the last 2.5 years of my father's life. And I didn't realize how much they were going to trigger me. And by that, I mean, they brought up all kinds of painful memories. And I don't think I understood what God was doing or understood how this was all going to end until I started working through what had happened and started realizing that God was behind everything and that he was leading me step by step. But it doesn't mean it wasn't painful, but I honestly think that when our pain surfaces, the best thing we can do is turn to the Lord and receive healing. So it was very much a healing journey for me. But I have to be honest, even at the final edits, when I was reading through the book, I would tear up in places. Now I know I cry easily, but it was a tender book for me to write and to remember the pain of our family dynamics.
Yeah, I can hear that you really just poured yourself into this and you didn't shy away from the emotions you were feeling.
Yes, and at times I wondered, how it might affect others. I mean, my desire is always to help people, but I was concerned at times that people might find it overwhelming. But I felt like the Lord kept telling me to continue on. And I could have just kept going because there is so much more to the story that's transpired since the events depicted in this book. But I reached a point where I really sense the Lord said it's done and you can let it go.
Thank you. So we've talked a little bit about the hardness of writing this.
Mhm.
And so tell me about two things. I want to know two things. One is, let's give listeners a chance to hear what is the book essentially about.
Mhm.
And then two, why you feel it's so important for this story to go out and for others to experience it and read it.
So this is a story of me going way back to when I was a child and came to faith when I was 10 years old in a local Baptist church and started praying for my dad that he would come to know the Lord. At the time I came to faith, neither one of my parents were practicing any sort of religion. But when my older sister and I came to faith, our mother started attending church with us at the Baptist church, and she eventually surrendered her life to the Lord, as did my younger brothers and sisters. And so we were sort of a family divided. And my dad, much to the surprise and shock of all of us, he went off and became a Christian Scientist. And it was only when I became much older that I realized that his family at one point had converted to Christian Science because he and his sister, who was just a little bit younger, had both been healed through the work of a Christian Science practitioner back when they were small children. And so the whole family became Christian Science. But at the time, when I was young and my dad went off and joined something that to me was a cult, it was unfathomable. And I spent years arguing with him and talking to him. He was a very difficult man. Sometimes what I would be saying to him would enrage him. But then out of the blue, the Lord started telling me, start calling your dad. And I had all kinds of reasons for thinking that that was absolutely terrible idea. I didn't really enjoy talking to him on the phone at all. And the only time I ever spoke to him was when he would answer the phone. And he was kind of like my gateway to get to my mom, who was the one I wanted to talk to. So I argued with God, as I often do, told him why that was a really lousy idea, but eventually I started doing it, and it was incredibly awkward at first, and eventually, we sort of got more comfortable talking to each other, and I started being more transparent with my dad about my life. And so this is basically a story for people who have a beloved unbeliever, because looking back, and it was really only looking back, I began to realize that all of the things that the Lord told me to do, go back to Los Angeles. Lord, I was just there. Why should I go back? Or throw your dad a birthday party. Wait, this is the guy who hates birthdays. We never celebrate his birthday. He's not going to want that. He's even made mom promise not to celebrate it. So I kept hearing God tell me to do things. And I think the message really is that only God knows what someone really needs. And he is truly not willing that any should perish. And so when I looked back, I saw that all of these little steps, um, reaching out to my dad and doing things that I thought were terrible ideas. These were actually the very things he was longing for. He was longing for someone to throw him a party and celebrate him. When I threw him a party, everyone thought it was a terrible idea, but he sat there like a little boy telling us stories and seemed just filled with joy. And only God knew. So this is kind of a story for people to show them that if you have someone you love, you need to listen to him. You need to listen to the Lord, and he will lead you in how to love that person well so that they will be drawn. We don't control other people's decisions, but we can certainly create an environment where someone feels really loved and cared for and can then perhaps make the leap to a God who loves and cares for them too. I'm crying already.
Well, it's an important part of your journey that you've experienced, and it seems like writing the book has let you see the big picture. But what I loved when you just shared, Betsy, was the honesty.
Mm,
I think that's a terrible idea, God, because that's sometimes how we are. God tells us things and we hear him, but we're not sure how that's going to turn out. And maybe it seems too scary, or, just like, I don't even want to do it. So you don't shy away from that in the book either. You share your real experience with just saying, I don't know, can I do this? And then
mhm,
taking those steps, and even crazy adventures along the way, getting stranded on a road, for example, fun
mhm,
moments that reinforce. So I wanted to ask you, and really it speaks to what you've already said, but just to really point out, because I know this is important to your heart. What
mhm.
do you hope a reader will take away from them when they've interacted with your book?
Well, I think first of all, when I was actually doing the things with my dad back in 2007 to 2009, which is, 14 years ago, I had to often go to the Lord and get healing because I could not do the things the Lord was asking me to do without getting healing of childhood wounds that made it really impossible for me to consider coming closer to this man. So it was healing for me at the time, but I found in the reading, in the writing, and going over it again, there was deeper and deeper levels of healing. And that's, I guess, my desire is that the reader themselves will be healed as they read this. That if what I've written causes memories to rise up for them, that they'll get healing. And I actually had someone that I spoke with on the phone yesterday, I think it was, tell me that they're going through the book slowly because it's causing memories to rise up, and they want to pay attention to those and to go to the Lord and make sure they get deep and profound healing from Him. Then the other message is just the one I sort of laid out a little bit ago, and that is that none of us really know what anyone else actually needs. And I think arguing with people is counterproductive. I think what draws all of us is love. And so I think the challenge is to truly love people from the heart. And sometimes we need healing to be able to truly love them. And I think that's all we can do. We can't force anybody. We're not able to save anyone. And we want to always be respectful because God is respectful and He never violates anyone's will. And so I think just telling people, look for opportunities to love people, but most of all, listen to God and ask Him to lead you in terms of what you say and what you do. Because the Lord, He is the hound of heaven. He is pursuing every person on the planet. And He wants us to partner with Him in that pursuit.
Wow. That's you brought up two really profound desires. One is to partner with God and listen to Him,
Hmm.
and I know something that we do at Healing Center International is a manual prayer.
Hmm.
That's one of the ways that we find healing and listen to Him.
Hmm.
But you also mentioned the healing that you want people to
Hmm.
have experience as
Hmm.
they're reading it. And you mentioned the person who said they're going really slowly because they're paying attention. Tell me
Hmm.
more about how we can, as we read a book like this, that might stir up some of the pain in
Hmm.
our own past.
Hmm.
How can we walk through a book like this and receive the healing? Do you have any ideas or thoughts that would help
Mm.
readers?
Mm. Well, my preference is for healing modalities such as the Emmanuel approach, Emmanuel spelled with an I, or heart sync. I actually have a short video on YouTube for the Emmanuel approach that leads you through a session. And so that could be helpful. But basically, the book has sort of two storylines going on simultaneously. And I think that's part of what made it so hard to write. And even when I had a manuscript together and would ask people to read it through, everyone got kind of lost about 20 pages in because I'm describing a chronological time starting in 2007 and going to 2009. So I'm describing some events on that sort of chronological timeline, but then I'm also describing all of the memories that those events triggered. And so you're going back in no particular order. It's more whatever my brain brought up by association. The memories are in there. And so to try to format or write things in a way where the memories were separate from the chronological story. I mean, at one point, we even tried to make the chronological story in the present tense, and the memories in the past tense. And then after putting in all this effort to do that, we decided it was a major fail. It was just so confusing. But we did end up doing some formatting things to make it clear and putting some actual dates in so people can tell, okay, this is when that happened. So, what would it look like for someone else to read the book and to receive healing from it? So, I would just say pay attention to your body and notice whatever you feel like when you're triggered. Maybe your neck gets tight or your chest gets tight. Maybe your stomach starts doing flip flops. Maybe you start to get a headache or your shoulders ache. It's different for everybody, but start noticing it when it's making you tense or triggered in any way, and then you can go to the Lord. You can go to the Lord and ask Him, Lord, what do you want me to know here? How did you see this? How did you see this event or this person? You can use the Emmanuel approach. You can use something like HeartSync. For me personally, I typically need someone else to help me. Some people are good at doing this on their own, but I typically will call someone and actually have a session with someone. And I find that there's such deep healing that God has for us. It's amazing how you can feel so upset, and then with the help of someone, you can quiet your body and you can go to the Lord, go to a positive memory, invite the Lord into the memory, and you can ask Him to show you how He sees that person, how He sees the situation, and He will bring healing. And so many times it was just the Lord telling me this wasn't your fault. Your dad was really upset, but it wasn't your fault. In other words, you were blamed, but what happened wasn't your fault. And the Lord would show me that I was His beloved little girl, and that it was okay, and that He was with me at the time, and that I could release my pain and my sadness to Him. Another way to do that is we offer something Monday through Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time called Daily Connect. And it's a group of people doing spiritual practices. And during the last 30 minutes or so, we do lead an Emmanuel session where you can connect to God and develop a joyful connection to Him that is robust enough to allow you to process pain. So, man, I got so much healing going through the book and just continually turning to the Lord.
And that is our prayer, right? As people are reading The Glorious End of Ralph Oliver Mall, that
Mm-hmm.
they too can experience healing and and even hear from the Lord Himself. How can they reach that difficult, hard relationship in
Mm-hmm.
their life? So much more than just telling a story. It's really an act of hope
Mm-hmm.
and an encouragement
Mm-hmm.
and a way forward for
Mm-hmm.
people to consider. That's you know, and that makes me think that you've told me that you've already started receiving feedback from people who have gotten the book. Tell me a couple of the things that you've heard and what has brought delight to you in hearing those things.
Well, I've just heard from a couple of people so far. I was number one, I was kind of surprised that anyone had read it already, but I think some people got it and just tore through it quickly. But it just people thanking me for writing it and just telling me how meaningful it was for them to hear the story. Um, I think it's hard to go through painful things, but I think pain does surface our wounds, things that we have buried most of the time completely unconsciously. We've buried things. And when life is going smoothly, we don't even think about them. But when something painful happens that feels like that wound, like maybe there's rejection involved and you feel rejection, then they can just come rising up. And sometimes they come rising up. What comes rising up is just the feeling. And you don't even realize the feeling is connected to something else. But so I see it as opportunity for healing. And I think as we heal, we become more like Christ. We become more loving, more compassionate, more empathetic toward people who are struggling in any way. And the desire to fix people kind of leaves. We just want to come alongside them and love them well. And so I think that's kind of the feedback I'm getting, is that they're hearing a story of someone who loves and is compassionate and is willing to be transparent. Now, there are parts of the book that I didn't write as transparently as I would have had it only been about me, but I have siblings, and they, they don't, they have a right to privacy. And so there were a fair number of stories that I could have put in there because it would have added to the drama, but I chose not to put in there because I wanted to protect my siblings. I think the death of a family patriarch is very painful, and it will pretty much trigger everybody. And you hear this across the board. Many, many families get into very profound and deep conflict when a parent is dying and they have different ideas about what should be done or who's doing what and how it's being done. And so this is also opportunity for people who are in that stage of life where their parent or grandparent or whoever it is dying and people are getting triggered, just to recognize this is kind of normal. But we can keep going to God and keep getting untriggered so that we can be um, places of healing and light in these situations.
Oh, that is so true. And I love that message of we can keep going back. We can keep going back and he's there.
Hmm.
And the honesty of it's messy.
Oh, and I did things that I deeply regret during that season because I would get really angry at a sibling. Um, yeah, so some of that bit I left out just because I don't want to expose people, but I did feel like the Lord was saying you need to tell the story.
And you did. You were faithful and you persevered 14 years,
Mm,
many edits,
mm,
complications trying to figure out how do we do this timeline to make it easy for readers and but you stuck with it. You stuck with it and you were faithful to do what God called you to do.
mm.
And set an example, and that is to be celebrated. And so tell me, give me a couple of words or a few sentences, whatever you like. How does it feel to be done?
Well, first of all, it's a huge relief because toward the end it really felt like a big boulder that I was lugging along. So it's a huge relief. And I put some little additional details at the end, and then I wondered, should I take those out? And I felt like God was saying to me that everything that's in there is for somebody. Maybe the little bits in the appendix at the end aren't for everyone, but they're for someone. And so I think that really helped me. I feel like he was saying it's done, and you don't have to say, "Oh, this is too long. I should go back through and edit it." So that feels really good. And I think it's just very satisfying, and especially I really appreciate appreciation. And so even having just a few people who have already read it reach out to me and tell me how much they enjoyed it, that that really meant a lot to me. That meant so much. And so it's very satisfying. And yeah, I'm eager to hear more and trusting that God is at work. And I've done my bit. And so now he gets to work. Hmm.
You
In
partnered
hearts
with
and
him
minds.
faithfully.
Yeah. Hmm.
Well, it would be remiss of us if we didn't tell people that you can get The Glorious End of Ralph Oliver Mall by Elizabeth Moll Stalcup at Amazon. It's available in paperback and also in Kindle version. And yeah, we as someone who works at HCI, just excited for people to experience your book. I say thank you for writing it, for persevering in it. It's such an important message. Even as someone who, helped with some of the behind the scenes things, I was impacted by the
Mm.
book. And one of the people that helped with the formatting said she rarely reads what she's formatting, and yet she kept going back to it and her eyes were hooked. and to places in the book, and she would have to stop and read parts of the story that she, would have normally just done some formatting and moved on from. So it's a very compelling book. Probably, I don't know, you have some really great books. I don't know if I'd say it's your most important book. You can decide whether you'd say that or not. But it certainly is one that is so worth reading. So
Mm,
worth
thank
reading.
you. Thank you so much, Christina. That means so much because you were involved in some of the hiccups that, there was some rough times where things were taking longer than we wanted them to. So just
Yeah.
appreciate you hanging in there with all of it too. And I would, I don't like to ask for things, but I would love to ask people to review the book. If you enjoyed it, please review it. And even a one sentence comment adds so much. And we recently learned, much to our surprise, that unless you have, I think it's 25 reviews on Amazon, their search engines are very sluggish to find you. So we're hoping to get lots of reviews for this book so that it's easy for people to find. Mm, yeah.
Well, anything else that you want to add, Betsy, before we finish and say thank you to everyone who's going to go out and get a copy of this book and let God speak to them through it.
I'll be praying for all of you. And I would love to hear your stories. Yeah.
We would, we would. So, well, thank you for having this conversation, for letting people who I know you and love you hear a little more about the process of writing this book, and maybe for all the people who are just discovering uh, Betsy Stalcup and Healing Center International, and hearing how great it is to have access to a book like The Glorious End of Ralph Oliver Mall. So,
Mhm.
thank you, everyone.
Mhm.